Tonight, on the back foot on the battlefield, but boosted diplomatically, Ukraine's president seizes his chance on the world stage. Volodymyr Zelenskyy warned no one, including NATO, is out of harm's way in a war he says Russia is determined to expand.
Even being part of a long-standing military alliance doesn't automatically mean you are safe.
He used the example of Russian incursions into NATO airspace, which Donald Trump said would justify Russian jets being shot down. The US president also said he now believes Ukraine can win back all the land it's lost to Russia, a shift Moscow puts down to Trump being mistaken and swayed by Zelenskyy. Ukraine's leader hailed Trump as a game changer, but will anything change? Elsewhere at the UN, Iran's president accuses the US and Israel of dealing a grievous blow to peace as his country hopes for a diplomatic breakthrough to avoid sanctions. Also tonight, unused bullets spell what investigators suspect is targeted violence after a deadly shooting at a US immigration field office. A super typhoon brings waves of destruction to Taiwan, Hong Kong and southern China, killing dozens of people. And the astropolitics of Space Race 2.0, NASA tells Sky News about the importance of beating China back to the moon.
We're just going to pursue excellence, like I talked about before. That's how you win a space race.
Good evening from the United Nations headquarters in New York. I'm Yalda Hakim. For a man who's been at war for 3.5 years, it hardly seems surprising that Ukraine's president offered a bleak view of the world when he addressed the General Assembly today. He declared we're in the most destructive arms race in human history, adding that weak international institutions like the UN have shown themselves unable to stop wars in Ukraine and elsewhere. They're criticisms that may sound familiar. Have a listen.
It has such tremendous potential, but it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy earlier today and Donald Trump yesterday. So two presidents on similar pages there. And Trump has found a sympathetic ear on another front, his demand that all of Europe stop buying Russian oil and gas. Have a listen. Would you say it is embarrassing, though, as President Trump said, that European countries are funding that war?
Well, we definitely are doing more. So it is of great regret that we haven't been able to put all these member states in the same position that getting rid of the Russian oil and gas. That's true.
My interview with the European Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas coming up on the programme. But we begin with this report from our International Affairs Editor Dominic Waghorn.
He is once again the focus of attention. All eyes on President Zelenskyy at the UN. After Donald Trump's U-turn, saying Ukraine has a chance of victory in its war with Russia.
Do you believe you can win the war with Russia? Can you beat Russia now with America's support?
Whatever Trump is saying, though, Ukraine's leader was reserving judgment. Earlier in the hall above, President Zelenskyy urged the world to halt Russia's aggression and the spiralling drone arms race it's unleashed.
We must use everything we have together to force the aggressor to stop. And only then do we have a real chance that this arms race will not end in catastrophe for all of us. If it takes weapons to do it, if it takes pressure on Russia, then it must be done. And it must be done now. Otherwise, Putin will keep driving the war forward wider.
And he made this claim about divine intervention and the US president that won't lose him any favor in the White House.
Weapons decide who survives. Excellencies, yesterday President Trump stood right here in this hall, and God saved him from a murder attempt during the campaign.
After his speech at the UN yesterday, Donald Trump surprised the world by saying for the first time that Russia might lose the war, calling its military a paper tiger and saying Ukraine could take back all its borders.
Donald Trump's apparent pivot on Ukraine is the talk of the UN General Assembly, but Western diplomats are urging caution. This president has been so erratic on the conflict, they say. He must be judged on his deeds and not his words.
As US Secretary of State Marco Rubio was meeting his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Moscow, the Kremlin was shrugging off the US president's withering description of Russia's military as a paper tiger.
Russia is certainly not a tiger. After all, Russia is more associated with the bear. There are no paper bears. Russia is a real bear. Putin has repeatedly and with varying degrees of emotion described our bear. You can recall this for yourself.
Every UN General Assembly has its moment. This year it belongs to this man, the jihadi turned statesman and revolutionary new leader of Syria. Ahmed al-Sharaa finished his speech focusing on the other war of our time, the conflict in Gaza.
We stand firmly with the people of Gaza, its children and women and all peoples facing violations and aggression. We call for an immediate end to the war. In conclusion, the Syrian story has not come to an end. It continues to write a new chapter entitled Peace, Prosperity and Development, and may the peace of God be upon you.
For both Gaza and Ukraine, in truth, it's the same this year at the UN as any other. For all their fine words, it's what leaders actually do next that matters, if escalating conflict is to be averted. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, New York.
Let's bring in our Mark Stone, who joins me live now. And Mark, I mean, it's quite extraordinary, actually. You know, the UN, people talk about its effectiveness, its ineffectiveness. It is a podium, a platform that world leaders come to and speed date for a day. They have some pizza on the side, you know. But what's been extraordinary, one of the stars this year of the UN General Assembly has been Ahmed al-Sharaa, the president of Syria. Let's work backwards and talk about what you saw there first.
Well, I made a point of wanting to be in the chamber for that moment because it was extraordinary. Let's remember, this is a guy who was a jihadist fighter in his early 20s, maybe even younger, I can't remember. In 2003-04, he travelled to Iraq to fight the Americans. I mean, he was imprisoned in Iraq by America for that. He wanted to kill Americans. And yet, all these years on, look where he is now. He's the president of Syria. He's a man who Donald Trump met in the Middle East. You and I were there. And he is now trying to forge a future for his country. It was a remarkable moment. You and I were saying before we came on air that there are always kind of stars of the Unger week, aren't there? Or the villains, whatever it might be. He is the kind of the star of this show, of this week, I think. And it reminded me of the extraordinary moments we've had over the years. You know, remember Yasser Arafat, 1974. The only leader, the only person who's not a leader of a country who was allowed to address the General Assembly. And he came with an olive branch and a pistol. And he said, "Don't let the olive branch fall from my hand." You know, that now feels like a very long time ago in terms of coexistence in that particular challenge. There have been other moments as well. Nikita Khrushchev, who banged his shoe on the podium, you know, a sign of Soviet power or dominance, as he would think it, over the West. So many moments. Nelson Mandela, months after he came out of Robben Island prison, was here. These are the moments, and I think today we saw another one. And I guess it's a reminder that if this institution is questioned, and many people do, with justification, what's the point of the UN? At moments like this, you see what it attempts to be: coexistence, unity, dialogue, peace. And that was kind of wrapped up in what Ahmed al-Sharaa said today.
Yeah, and there's often, with these characters, comes the themes around them. And I guess the themes for the last couple of days have been these two wars, Gaza and Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelenskyy spoke today. You know, it was a somber speech, but he has come a long way since, frankly, yesterday.
He has, but I was wondering how Zelenskyy would frame today, because as far as he was concerned, he told me yesterday it was a game changer, that Trump had moved the dial. What he said was a massive deal about, maybe Ukraine being able to take back all its land. So I wondered whether he'd carry that into his speech today. He didn't. It was a warning, a massive warning for the West. He talked about America's domestic challenges as well. He was kind of appealing to Trump and his base as well. He brought up the death of Charlie Kirk because he sees that all as a broad challenge that the world has, a challenge of the proliferation of weapons, but also of violence in the world. I thought it was a really interesting speech. He spoke in perfect English. This is a guy who a few years ago did not speak very good English, but he recognises he needs to speak in the language of the people who hold the key to the future of his country. That's the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, thank you as always for all of your analysis there. Well, as Mark was saying there, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy issuing that stark warning. Let's just have a closer look now at the Russian drone and fighter jet incursions that have provoked alarm and warnings among NATO allies. Just over 2 weeks ago, Poland said it shot down a number of Russian drones that violated its airspace. Russia said it wasn't deliberate. Nonetheless, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said it put the country closer to military conflict than at any other time since the Second World War. Days later, on the 14th, Romania scrambled jets to intercept what was determined to be a Russian drone in its airspace. Then, last Friday, 3 Russian fighter jets flew around in Estonia's airspace for 12 minutes, an incident described as brazen. Estonia's defense minister and forces later released Russian MiGs flight paths indicating where they flew within the airspace border. And on Monday, in Denmark, unidentified drones flew over Copenhagen airport, temporarily halting flights. Denmark and NATO suspect that Russia was also involved in this, which it denies. Well, I'm joined now by Latvia's President, Edgars Rinkēvičs. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program, sir.
Thank you for having me.
When we hear these sorts of warnings from the Ukrainian president that this isn't just Ukraine's war, that this is NATO's war, this is Europe's war, this is a global war, and then we see these sorts of incursions by Russia, I mean, given the proximity of your country to Russia, how concerned are you about all of this?
Well, I think that what we are seeing is the kind of pattern of provocations, the pattern that we sometimes call hybrid warfare. You are talking about the recent incursions in the Polish or Estonian airspace, but let's not forget what happened in the Baltic Sea around Christmas time. We had a couple of incidents with undersea cables. When NATO put more patrolling ships, so-called Baltic Sentry mission started, all of a sudden those kind of incidents ceased to happen. Well, that doesn't mean that they are not going to resume at some point, but it seems that currently Russia is simply testing NATO, testing the European Union, testing the resolve that we have to resist such kind of provocations. And from that point of view, President Zelenskyy has a point.
We've seen Polish fighter jets shoot down some of these drones, but what do you think NATO now needs to do collectively to send a message to Moscow that they can't just get away with it?
Well, first of all, I think what we are seeing currently is that NATO has not yet adapted to this reality. We need to have a much more stringent policy. The Baltic states are covered by so-called Baltic air policing mission. That started back in 2004. That was a completely different era. And what we need now is to transform that Baltic air policing mission into the Baltic air defense mission, so that in case there is incursion, in case that we see that there is a serious challenge, serious threat to our countries, then yes, the show of force, the use of force is the proper response. I do believe that such kind of firm stance would deter Moscow. Any statement about concern or deep concern or serious escalation simply does not work at this point.
Do you think the United States, President Trump, has used that force at any point in the last few months?
Well, I do see that the United States were using the force against Iran, and I think that message was very well received in many capitals. So there has been already the case where the United States have been actually serious. Yesterday, President Trump was also answering the question of the journalist about possibility of shooting down Russian fighter planes. He said that he would support that. I do not call for a kind of, immediate shooting down of any planes, but I think that one thing that Russia needs to take into account, that if this country keeps pushing the envelope, at one point there can be a very serious consequence. And I think that unfortunately Russians so far have always overplayed their, let's say, cards, and then they get much more serious response. So we must be prepared to all options, and yes, we have to be able to not only issue another statement, but also, in case of the need, to use the force.
Are you concerned that President Trump is flipping and flopping on this issue too much?
Well, frankly, when we have any consultations with the United States, we have got always support.
And does the United States feel they have Europe's support? Because President Trump is accusing Europe of not doing enough by funding its own war. He
has definitely our support.
But Russian oil and gas is being bought by European nations. He's asked for that to stop.
Latvia has stopped buying that oil and gas back in 2022. We are calling other European nations that still do that to stop buying oil and gas, and we very much support President Trump.
You said in the last few minutes issuing statements of concern is not sufficient and use of force needs to be put in place. Do you think that there needs to be force or sanctions imposed on Hungary or Slovakia or some of these countries still buying oil?
Well, I would say I would advocate currently for more sanctions on Russia. And I do believe if we really get secondary sanctions, especially to those countries that are still buying Russian oil and gas outside of the European Union, if we implement the EU policy that is phasing out purchases of oil and gas, then we don't need sanctions on Slovakia and Hungary. I do believe that people in Budapest and in Bratislava are going also to listen to what President Trump is saying, because they have always supported this administration.
President, we're grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, it turned more than a few heads yesterday when President Trump said Ukraine could win back all of the territory it's lost to Russia. But how does that suggestion sit with the reality on the ground? Our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark, has been taking a look.
President Trump's rhetorical reversal last night took everyone by surprise, and it was pretty big stuff, because he said that there's no reason why Ukraine couldn't retain and regain all of the territory that it lost from the beginning. And if we think about that, that's quite a claim. Here is the territory of Ukraine as in 1991, when it was established as one of the 15 successor states, along with the Russian Federation, with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so that is Ukraine as legally constituted. And Ukrainians very obviously say, we want all of our territory back. They would say that, wouldn't they? Fine, that's understandable. But in 2014, the Russians took Crimea, and then a few months later, they used instability in the area of the Donbass, which they created, to grab a part of the Donbass. And the Ukrainians have been fighting about that since 2014. This is a really difficult one, because they'd almost certainly not get Crimea back for military reasons as well as political reasons. Crimea was always an anomalous part of Ukraine, but that's a separate issue. Could they ever get back part of the Donbass? We don't know. But since 2022, February the 24th, 2022, Russia invaded the whole of Ukraine. They tried to take the whole country, and they failed, but they took about 20% of it. And that map that we see all the time now is the one that we have got very used to, of that 20% of Ukraine, which is now occupied by Russian forces. It's less than it used to be. The Ukrainians took back part of Kharkiv. They took back part of Kherson in the autumn of 2022. But that's what the Russians have got hold of now. Could the Ukrainians get that back in the way that President Trump suggests? Well, they almost certainly can't get Crimea back for the foreseeable future. They probably can't get all of this back. But maybe they could make inroads. Maybe they could push the Russians back. And if they began to push the Russians back towards their 2022 starting lines before February 2022, then I can guarantee you that President Putin would become a lot more keen on ceasefires if he started to lose some of the territory that he spent 3 years taking.
That was Professor Michael Clark there. Well, earlier I spoke to the European Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas, who's also the bloc's foreign policy chief. I began by asking her about Donald Trump's about-face on how Russia's war in Ukraine could end. Have a listen.
Russia's economy is not doing well. If we put more pressure on Russia, then this war could be over. And Ukraine is not really giving up because it's their territory, it's their people. And if we help them to push back, then it is achievable.
But you know, we also know with President Trump, it's the last person he's spoken to. And yesterday it was Ursula von der Leyen and President Zelenskyy, and that's why his position is where it's at. Are you cautiously optimistic at this point?
We are optimistic at this point. I spoke to the Ukrainians yesterday as well. They were very optimistic after the meeting with President Trump. But of course, we are living day by day. I mean, the situation is still very grave and we have to do more. We have put forward the 19th package of sanctions to really pressure Russia so that they would also want peace and come to the negotiation table. And we are also helping Ukraine. And I'm happy that the United States now is also seeing this the same way.
I met with President Zelenskyy last week. He said the only language that Vladimir Putin understands is the language of force. What would you tell Donald Trump to do now?
Our plea is very, very clear. It is we have to support Ukraine. So give funding to Ukraine, give arms and weapons to Ukraine so that they can defend their people. By the way, 93% of the targets, Russian targets inside Ukraine have been civilians. So they are deliberately targeting civilians to cause as much harm that they can possibly do. And as we are here in United Nations, where we have the international law, the United Nations Charter that says that you can't do that. So we have to collectively stand up to this, otherwise aggression just pays off.
One of the things that President Trump said yesterday, and he accused European leaders as being embarrassing because they were basically funding the war against them. He called on European leaders to stop buying Russian oil and gas. He has a point, doesn't he?
Of course he has a point. I mean, we have been saying this for quite some time, that the dependency on Russian oil and gas is actually also fueling the war. But you have to see that we have done a lot to diminish that, really, to get rid of Russian oil and gas. And there are a few countries who are still buying oil and gas, and also there America has leverage because they are also good friends of America. The neighbors around those countries have also proposed, alternatives. So we can do this. And if we all want this war to end, we should have collective efforts to stop the funding so that they can't wage this war.
Would you then call on Hungary and Slovakia to be sanctioned, for example?
No, not sanctioned, but of course what they can do is to really build on the alternatives that neighbors are providing them to get rid of the Russian oil and gas, like President Trump has asked.
Do you think they'll do that? Because, I mean, the Hungarian leader says that that's not a viable solution for them at this point.
Well, we are working on also trying to help, like I said. I mean, the neighboring countries are providing or offering, different alternative routes. The thing is that this oil and gas is just cheaper. But again, if you want this war to stop, it's still funding the war of Ukraine, because the wars end when one party runs out of the means to run this war. And what we also need to understand is that Russia has invaded another country. They don't feel the pain of the war like Ukrainians feel, because their people are dying in Ukraine and not in Russia. So what we need to do is really to use those tools so that also Russia would want peace.
Would you say it is embarrassing, though, as President Trump said, that European countries are funding that war?
Well, we definitely are doing more. So it is of great regret that we haven't been able to put all these member states in the same position that getting rid of the Russian oil and gas. That's true.
European Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas speaking to me earlier. You're watching The World live from the UN in New York. Still ahead on the programme, anti-ICE engravings found on ammunition at the scene of what the FBI is investigating as politically motivated attack. And Iran vows to rebuild facilities destroyed by US and Israeli strikes. We speak to the country's nuclear chief next.
I want to start the programme today with an aim, a story that I can't get out of my head. The campaign has now started. This is your chance. Tell people. This is the Politics Hub. It's not correct. The tax burden is projected to go up.
No, I am talking about...
No, but I'm not. This is my interview. Look, this is ridiculous.
No one does care about us.
I'm really interested in that. On the Politics Hub, we like to push the boundaries. He's got the majority. The question is, what is he going to do with it?
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling.
It's not his country, it's ours.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Welcome back to The World, live from the UN headquarters. Now to news away from New York for now, to Texas, where a gunman has fired on an immigration field officer, killing one detainee and wounding two others before ending his own life. He's been named as 29-year-old Joshua Jan. President Trump has just described him as deranged, and it's what's allegedly scrawled on unused bullets at the scene that investigators believe make this a targeted act of violence against immigration enforcement, the agency commonly referred to as ICE. U.S. correspondent David Blevins reports.
Agents sweep the firing point, a rooftop overlooking an immigration field office in Dallas, Texas.
3 people shot. Multiple people shot.
Having opened up from here, the shooter was found dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The FBI is leading the investigation, and with tension high over immigration, it says the evidence points to an ideological motive.
I can confirm at this time that the FBI is investigating this incident as an act of targeted violence. What I can also share with you is that early evidence that we've seen from rounds that were found near the suspected shooter contain messages that are anti-ICE in nature.
FBI Director Kash Patel posted a picture of unspent bullet casings from the scene, one engraved with the words anti-ICE. Law enforcement raided this home at Fairview, Texas, one of several associated with the gunman. He's been named as Joshua John, a 29-year-old registered independent, previously convicted of delivering marijuana. It's the third attack in 2 months on immigration customs enforcement in Texas. The Vice President blaming it on rhetoric from Democrats.
If you want to stop political violence, stop attacking our law enforcement as the Gestapo. If you want to stop political violence, stop telling your supporters that everybody who disagrees with you is a Nazi. If you want to stop political violence, look in the mirror. That's the way that we stop political violence in this country, and we've got to do it.
ICE agents have been rounding people up across America, enforcing Donald Trump's push for mass deportation. Their controversial tactics sparking protests and heated debate in an already charged political atmosphere. It's just 2 weeks since the assassination of the conservative activist Charlie Kirk in Utah. And again, America is confronting just how often political difference is turning into political violence.
That was David Blevins reporting there. Now, here at the UN, leaders and diplomats have doubled down on familiar demands for the war in Gaza to end. Inside Gaza, though, Palestinian officials and doctors say 22 people, including 9 children, were killed by Israeli airstrikes that hit a shelter in central Gaza City. The Israeli military says it was targeting Hamas militants in the area and tried to avoid civilian casualties. The IDF is pushing into the heart of the city, putting at risk Palestinians who'd stayed put, hoping that growing pressure for a ceasefire would halt the offensive. Well, we heard earlier from Kaja Kallas, the European Commission Vice President. During our conversation, I also asked her about Donald Trump's meeting yesterday with Gulf leaders to discuss Gaza and his upcoming talks with Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu. Have a listen.
Yesterday, I also met with the Arab leaders after the meeting with President Trump, and they were very content of this meeting, really, that President Trump heard their worries and they put forward very clear positions. Now, of course, it's a question when President Trump also meets the Israeli Prime Minister, if these messages are conveyed and there is real ceasefire. Is in our interest that there is ceasefire, release of hostages, and also we discussed yesterday the governance of Gaza afterwards. The two-state solution is something that all the European member states support.
Kaja Kallas there. Well, staying with the Middle East, because another key speaker at the UN General Assembly today was Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian. He denounced US and Israeli attacks on his country in June as a grievous blow to peace in the region. It was his first remarks at a global forum since strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. Have a listen.
We are not after a nuclear weapon. This is a religious belief and a decree by the Supreme Leader. Therefore, we have in no way pursued weapons of mass destruction and will never do so.
Iran's president there. Well, meantime, time is running out for Iran to strike a deal with Britain, France and Germany to delay the return of UN sanctions over its nuclear program. They gave Iran a 30-day window, which is about to close. Here's a reminder of the recent timeline of tensions. Let's just take a look. 3 of Iran's main nuclear facilities were hit by unprecedented US strikes on the 22nd of June in the midst of Iran's air war with Israel. The next day, Iran responded by targeting a sprawling US military base in Qatar. It gave the Qataris warning and damage was limited. threat. President Trump then announced a ceasefire in the 12-day conflict between Israel and Iran. Last month, the UK, France and Germany began the process of restoring major UN sanctions on Iran, which were lifted under the 2015 nuclear deal. That agreement's been unraveling since Donald Trump withdrew the US from it in 2018. On the 9th of September, Iran and the UN nuclear watchdog said they'd reached a deal on resuming inspections at sites, including those bombed by the US and Israel. But questions remain over its implementation. And last week, the UN Security Council declined to stop what are known as snapback sanctions on Iran. Well, Iran's nuclear chief has admitted some of his country's nuclear facilities were destroyed by US strikes in June, adding that his country has no intention of engaging in direct nuclear talks with America. Speaking to Sky News in Vienna, the head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran vowed the facilities will be rebuilt despite international pressure and the threat of further attacks by Israel. He spoke to our Europe correspondent, Alistair Buckle.
President Trump described America's attacks on your country as a spectacular success. What is your assessment?
It is quite normal that during a military attack on facilities they incur damage and the infrastructure is destroyed. What is important is that science, know-how, technology and industry, they are long-standing and deeply rooted in the history of Iran.
So how long would it take you to rebuild to the position that you were in before the US strikes?
It doesn't matter how long it takes. What matters is that the know-how is in our possession and we will rebuild it with our national will and according to our national plans.
So why did you enrich uranium to 60% levels, which is above what is necessary for nuclear energy and not far off weapons grade enrichment? Why did you go to those levels?
The enrichment percentage, which is presented, is public opinion and in the media is fueled by politicians, adventurers and our enemies. The enrichment percentage is not necessarily for weapons when it is high. We need higher enrichment for our sensitivities, precision, measurement tools. No one is selling us these items. We have been under sanctions for years. We need these products for the safety system of our reactors and for sensitive processes used for managing our reactors.
What is your message to the US President? Are you willing to restart direct negotiations with the Americans to talk about your nuclear program?
There is no need to talk to them. The United States government has committed great injustice and oppression to the Iranian people, has inflicted heavy blows on Iran since the beginning of the Islamic Revolution, and has recently carried out military aggressions against our country. The US government is an aggressor, and that has violated the rights of the Iranian people. A country that allows its puppet and proxy force, the Israeli regime, in the region to slaughter innocent people in this way. Such a country is not recognized by anyone to talk to them. An enemy is an enemy, even if they have not shown hostility. While the US hostility is great, it is futile to talk to such an enemy. While indirect talks were held and negotiations were in progress, they carried out military attacks. One advantage of the indirect negotiations is that there is a third party who witnessed the negotiations, and it's recorded in history. They came to the negotiating table and then abandoned it and forgot that they had made a promise and had made an agreement. The US government is notorious for breaking promises. It has many broken promises and no one can trust them anymore. You can trust the United States only after they prove that they are trustworthy. But when they are full of broken promises, no one would trust them.
The Israelis have destroyed your nuclear facilities. They've destroyed your air defences. They've destroyed a lot of your air force. They've taken out your key nuclear scientists. They now have domination in the skies above Iran and will probably seek to maintain that.
Is this what the world wants?
Is this what the international community is seeking?
چه ارزشی ایجاد کرده؟
What value has it created?
این جنایتکاری و این نسل‌کشی که الان داره انجام میده.
This is a crime, and this genocide that is being committed in Gaza. You saw what the country's voters for at the United Nations in the last few days. They voted against the genocide and against these crimes. These crimes have no precedent in history. Israel has whitewashed the faces of criminals throughout human history. Never in history has such genocide been committed previously, have such crimes and this aggression been committed before ever. The world should not allow such a rabid dog to oppress the world. We are here, we are alive, and we will continue our work.
Alistair Bunkle with that report. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim, in New York. Just ahead, nearly 2 million flee as a super typhoon hits Taiwan, China and Hong Kong.
We arrive, a secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Welcome back to the programme. Almost 2 million people have been forced out of their homes in China as a super typhoon hits the southern coast after devastating parts of Taiwan and the Philippines. Typhoon Ragasa swept through the northern Philippines on Monday and Taiwan yesterday. In Taiwan, at least 17 people were killed when heavy rain caused a barrier lake in Hualien County to overflow, causing damage to a bridge and sweeping vehicles away. The typhoon has now hit southeast China, while Hong Kong has issued its highest possible typhoon warning. Our Asia correspondent Helen Ann Smith has this report.
Imagine facing this. The sheer power of the water and the panic. Typhoon Ragasa bore down on Hong Kong in the early hours of the morning. A super typhoon that brought lashing wind and rain and left swathes of this city underwater. In Taiwan, the impact has been devastating and deadly. Here, a natural dam burst its banks, sending torrents of water smashing through homes. Residents left to cling and to hope. Rescuers were the only lifeline for many, and they are only just beginning to assess the damage, count the cost, and reflect on their lucky escapes. We had no idea the water was coming, says this man. Only when it flooded did we realise. It scared us to death. If you didn't escape within 5 or 10 minutes, you would have been swept away. The Philippines was also hard hit. Floods and landslides claimed lives in remote and hard-to-reach places. On mainland China, streets stood shuttered. More than 1 million were evacuated here. Many others heeded warnings to stay home. Thousands of businesses, like Mr. Lee's, forced to close.
It has a big impact. We can't do business. No one comes out. We can't do business. It's difficult.
Next door over tea, neighbours said they are well practiced for storms, but this one was cause for concern.
It made us quite nervous, actually, because they said it would make landfall here. The government was well prepared. They sent people out to check preparations.
In the end, the damage done in this part of China has not been as bad as many feared, but the power of Ragasa has still brought multiple megacities to an almost complete standstill with all the economic toll that that takes. And it matters because both the intensity and the regularity of this type of storm is increasing. This is the 9th typhoon so far this year in a region that would normally average about 6.
Winds had barely dropped here before the cleanup began. This operation, a well-oiled machine. Ragasa continues its path west towards Vietnam. Its destruction is not yet done. Helen Ann Smith, Sky News in Zhuhai, Guangdong Province.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, the first US astronauts to be sent to the moon in more than 50 years, or whether they can win the space race with China.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Go ahead, back white jacket.
Deborah Haynes from Sky News. He called you Daddy earlier.
No, he did it very affectionately. Daddy, you're my daddy. Thank you.
Leicester is on its knees.
They've ripped the soul out of my factory and there's nothing left.
It is eerily quiet.
It's constantly on the brink of capacity.
There's overcrowding. It's not a new thing.
It's rough.
There's nothing to hide. Why aren't international journalists allowed in?
Are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation.
The region, I think, is on edge because they are anticipating a retaliation.
Iran retaliates for the US attacks.
The founding principle of the alliance, that an attack on one is an attack on all.
Could Putin attack another NATO country within 5 years?
I'm
Cordelia Lynch, Sky's Asia correspondent based here in Bangkok. We've been undercover inside Asia's huge network of scam centres.
This compound is, without a doubt, the worst. It is essentially hell on earth.
We cover a vast, varied and dynamic region that's shaping the rest of the world.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I want to start the programme today with a name, a story that I can't get out of my head. The campaign has now started. This is your chance. Tell people. This is the politics hub. That's not correct. The tax burden is projected to go up.
No, I am talking about...
No, but I'm not. This is my interview. Look, this is ridiculous.
No one does care about us.
I'm really interested in that. On the politics hub, we like to push the boundaries. He's got the majority. The question is, what is he going to do with it?
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back to the programme. Now we're going out of the world for a moment to look at what's becoming Space Race 2.0. The first American astronauts set to go to the moon in more than 50 years have told Sky News it's very important that they beat China there. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore reports.
These are the faces of the new space race. The 4 astronauts due to head to the moon as soon as February, the first time humans have left the relative safety of Earth's orbit since Apollo 17 in 1972. They'll loop around the moon on a 10-day mission, preparing the way for a lunar landing in 2027. And they carry the weight of NASA's and the White House's determination that America will beat China back to the surface.
How do you feel about your roles in Space Race 2.0? Do you sense that weight of expectation?
We've definitely listened to that, and we understand, why there's this perspective of a race and the benefit to just having that realistic viewpoint of what's going on in the world. We're just going to pursue excellence, like I talked about before. That's how you win a space race, and that's just how you move our countries forward.
3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1.
Their rocket and capsule have only flown once before, a test flight that looped around the moon without anybody on board. The astronauts were due to repeat the mission last year, but problems, including with the critical heat shield, delayed a human launch until now. It'll take the crew over the far side of the moon that always faces away from Earth.
We could see parts of the moon that never have had human eyes lay upon them before. And believe it or not, human eyes are one of the best scientific instruments that we have. Our geologists are beyond excited for our eyes to look at the moon, and we've been training how to turn those observations into tangible science for them.
The astropolitics in the new space race loom large. China has already beaten the US to land a robotic spacecraft on the far side of the moon, and it wants to put taikonauts on the surface by 2030. It matters who's first.
If China is to sustain a significant presence on the moon in the century to come, I would expect the United States and India and perhaps Europe as well to do something similar, to say, hey, don't forget about us, we're here as well. And if you want to develop rules and best practices in space, you can't do it without us.
It's one small step for man.
The world was transfixed by the grainy images of the Apollo missions. NASA hopes the new Artemis space program will give a new generation a front row on history, with humans back on the surface, this time to stay. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Just want to finish tonight's programme with a moment here in New York that truly symbolised a shift from conflict to dialogue. This week, Syria's interim leader Ahmad al-Sharaa shared a stage with the former CIA director David Petraeus. Neither would have thought that possible, back in 2006 when Petraeus oversaw al-Sharaa's detention in Iraq when he was an al-Qaeda fighter. Richard Engel and I discussed this in the latest episode of the World podcast. Just have a listen. I've got an email here from General Petraeus where I said, General, I'm just wondering, was this the first time you'd met him? And I'm curious to know what he was like around you backstage. He said it was the first time they'd met, and he was very impressive, calm, poised, even gracious. On stage, General Petraeus described him as, he said, how are you? And to all the people who are your fans, including me. I mean, I just found the encounter, former CIA director, 4-star general,
Look, sometimes
sitting
there can
across
be
from this
admiration among
insurgent.
enemies. There can be admiration among enemies.
It's incredible. I mean, it blew my mind. And you and I have covered that conflict in Iraq, for the longest time. These were enemies of America, the enemies of the so-called free world. And someone stood up on stage before Sharaa came on and said to Sharaa, I'd like to call up on stage, the president of Syria, Ahmad al-Sharaa, welcome to the free world. And my mind was completely blown away.
Welcome to the free world.
That was Richard and I on The World. I've got Mark here with me again. I mean, Mark, I guess this is a bit of a good news event versus all the grim things that we've been hearing, Ukraine and Gaza, for the last few days.
Yeah, and on Gaza, which has been slightly overshadowed by Ukraine, there is some news. I mean, we know that Trump met with key Middle Eastern countries and Muslim countries, including places like Indonesia, yesterday. Today, his fixer-in-chief, Steve Witkoff, has been meeting with other diplomats from those countries, and he said tonight, we're hopeful. And I might even say confident that in the coming days we will be able to announce some sort of breakthrough. I've spoken to sources, Middle Eastern sources, who've said that they are consistent on their messaging: no annexation in the West Bank, no illegal settlers, status quo in Jerusalem at the Holy Site, aid into Gaza, an end to hostages out, and an end to the war. We have said this so many times before, but there feels again like there is a bit of movement on Gaza.
Mark, thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of today's coverage. We'll, of course, be back again tomorrow and on the news at 10 in the next few minutes. Stay with us.